The inspirational source for this article is based on a case study in a long-standing business relationship between a buyer and a supplier. The buyer is located in the United States and the supplier is located in the Netherlands. And the relationship is based on the Dutch supplier manufacturing and supplying semi-manufactured leather material to their US counterpart. And both parties decided to embark on a new activity in the commercial aviation industry. It was already back in 2006. And for that to happen, the Dutch supplier needed to produce a sample that could pass the aviation standards, which are pretty high and totally different from furniture leather, which they were used to produce. And in the process, they failed to produce a first sample that could pass the test, although the buyer had already made some preparations, especially established a handbook with all the knowledge and recipes and production systems required, including chemical agents to produce aviation leather. But it nonetheless led to a misfire. And this had to be reported to the buyer, and their response was rather weak to this event, although they expected that the first sample would pass the test after all the discussions that they had before. And in the Dutch facility, they started to issue a new sample themselves. And unfortunately, after 8 weeks, this sample did not pass the test either. It had to be reported to the buyer, and this time the response was totally different, because now they really began to ask questions and offer their help in a more, let's say, deliberate way. And this then finally led to the adaptations necessary in order to make aviation leather in a good way that could pass the test. Now, this is more the case background from which we started. And we said, okay, so we had two multiple episode conflicts, different reactions, different responses when it comes to adaptive behavior. There was a lot of dissatisfaction with the situation. In fact, it was a kind of serious crisis that both parties faced. And for us, it was reason to say, okay, what can we do with it? Because it's an interesting case. It provides a lot of information. It's a rich description. And then Niels and I discussed it, and we said, well, why don't we make a scenario-based experiment out of this? And they said, okay, we just write a script, and we write our manipulations with our questionnaires, and let students who we invited to be research participants in the study, and let's work on it and see what comes out of it. And conflict expression theory was for us a very good, let's say, theoretical starting point to see, well, what happens, or how does it matter how one express a conflict or a concern or a dissatisfaction, disagreement to the other party. And we had different configurations that we derived from the literature and that we could really test in this experiment. First with students in a pilot study, and then also with MBA students, practitioners who already have a lot of business experience, and later on in a real sample. And this is the basis for this article. It took about 4 years from the beginning, so the idea generation phase and pilot testing up to now.
Yeah, so and what we saw there is that in the second episode, the US partner changed how they expressed the conflict towards the Dutch partner. And that related very much to a paper in AMR on conflict expression theory. That we thought, okay, this might be an explanation in this case why the conflict in the second episode was resolved. And therefore what we did is we translated this case study into an experiment, and we conducted many different experiments. The first we did with students just to see what sorts of effects are there. And then that resulted in, let's say, a final experiment based on which we wrote this paper. in which we summarized this case and we manipulated the conflict expressions. And there we observed that indeed there were differences in conflict expression and how the supplier reacted. So that's the background of the study. Yeah, so we really took the case we observed in practice and build an experiment based on that. So of course let's say the conflict we observed in the case study, it was just one conflict between two partners, right? So the effects of conflict expression might be fitting only to that very particular situation. So yeah, therefore we conducted an experiment with, I think, around 170 US-based supply chain practitioners, and there we observed basically similar effects, but we could also conduct or test more hypotheses on other effects. So yeah, that's how we continued with the research. So some of there are many findings, but I think most interesting to highlight is that there is some, let's say, paradox in what you want to achieve in a conflict and how you should express what you want to achieve. We observed that in general, directness by itself has no effect. So being very clear on what you want to achieve in the conflict has no direct effect. But if you're at the same time open to the other party and open to see the other party's perspective, then expression, then you're able to achieve positive outcomes in a conflict situation.
Yeah, the very idea is always or that's supposed to be the rationale, that if you are really, let's say, direct, and if you are very overt or assertive, it may even work against you to resolve a conflict. It's better than to combine it with a kind of, let's say, understanding, empathy to the situation of the partner, the situation where he is at. Because if you are only direct, it might also be conceived as something like arrogance or meddling in our situation, which was pretty much the case in the first event that I studied in that time. So in the second time, it was really more a mixture of, let's say, yes, directness, but also this more understanding the situation of the partner. And this finally led to positive adaptive behaviors in our case and also in our study, which is the nice thing.
So for future research, so some in our model, we also had emotions constructs, right, which we separated in positive emotions and negative emotions. And we found a clear mediating effect of emotions in the relationship between conflict expression and supplier adaptations. But of course, capturing emotions in an experiment that we did, we might not capture all experiences, all emotions that the participants experience. So if we're looking about future research, what might be nice is to dive deeper into this expression theory and perhaps come up with experimental settings in which you're better able to capture real emotions of participants. So that might, for example, be with working with the actor confederates, or working with video experiments. Perhaps even go a step further and having brain scans in there, but that's all for the future. But it might be nice opportunities to explore those.
Numerous implications can be offered from our study, not only to supply chain managers, but also to business practitioners who deal with external parties in general. The first one being is that conflicts are generally conceived as dysfunctional. Conflicts should be therefore avoided or mitigated when they occur. And in some conflicts have a bad reputation. Our study, however, shows that, and there is also some theoretical support for this, that conflicts can also be contributive and functional and really lead to positive adaptive behaviors. And what matters, though, is how one reacts to an emergent conflict situation in terms of a disagreement or a dissatisfaction. And a dissatisfaction by its very nature prompts negative emotional cues, and we can get very angry or show really a kind of opposition. We are not happy with that, or we are resorting to contracts or agreements or whatsoever, probably making things worse. In our case, it shows that if there is an emergent conflict, a disagreement, it is important that you stay calm in the first place, but also be very direct in expressing your concern. And at the same time, it only works in combination with showing your empathy to the position in which your supplier finds him or herself in at the moment. It's a difficult situation, and it's good to show some empathy for that situation at the same time. And if you do that, it might lead to positive adaptive behavior. But our intuition probably might tell us something else. And it's important to resist it. So better to think twice before expressing your concern. And there is another challenge, of course, because in any business relationship, and even in ours that we examined, and based on our experiment on, there are multiple people involved in business relationships, supply chain relationships. So it is very important that you discuss your approach towards the partner in an emerging conflict situation together. That the kind of one voice speaking, which is a very coherent voice towards your supplier. And this is, of course, not only a matter of organization, so the way you organize your relationship structures, but it's also a matter of conflict management competences towards your in maintaining or developing external relationships. So this is the final recommendation that we can make from the study, and in the setting that we studied, which was a long-standing business relationship. So which also in such situations where there are trustful relationships developed, conflicts still can occur, dysfunctional but also functional. Depends, of course, on the reaction. But when we think of other situations, more new task situations, or the emerging networks surrounding the smart industrial revolution, for instance, where many adaptive behaviors and adaptations need to be made towards production systems or need to be innovated together, these situations are also prone to conflicts. And especially in those situations, conflict management really becomes an issue. And it starts with not how one, let's say, immediately responds to a conflict, act on a conflict, but first how one expresses a conflict. So this is the basic, let's say, conclusion from our research.